what the government is looking at. The big question we're asking on ET now this Tuesday evening is this intervention coming in too late and is it too little? We're joined by a very eminent panel on the show this evening. We've got Mr. Rahul Khullar, former chairman of the TRAI, Mr. Rajan Mathews, Director General of COAI, Sanjeev Aga, an eminent industry expert, Sanjeev Kapoor, former CEO, or Sanjay Kapoor rather, former CEO of Bharti Airtel. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us on ET now this evening. Mr. Aga, I'm going to start off with you. You heard the comments there by the finance minister saying that that the regulator and the telecom ministry can't preside over such dramatic collapse of the sector. Is the sector on the brinks of a collapse, or is that a bit of an exaggeration according to you?
No, that's the question, and we'll try to answer it during this half an hour or 20 minutes that's left. Your question is it too little? Is it too late? But let me just rewind, and I've been, as I was driving to your studio, I was looking at the paradox. You have a sector where customer demand is burgeoning and is large. So you would expect a certain contours of a sector, but what do you get? I've got some back of the envelope calculations. I'm taking January to March quarter, and if I annualize the numbers, the revenue of the sector is going to plunge to 1,80,000 crores or less. Now the losses of the sector annualized are going to be, hold your breath, 60,000 crores. Now these may not necessarily be reflected in the financial statements because some operators may choose to capitalize. But if I sort of normalize and annualize, on a revenue of no more than 1,80,000 crores, you are looking at losses of 60,000 crores, at least 33% of revenue. And you're looking at debt, spectrum debt, bank debt, vendor credit and so on in the magnitude of 6 lakh crores. So this sector is heading straight into a speeding train. And the sector is 6.5% of the national GDP. So it's not just a sector, it's a national economic crisis. And I am reminded of a term, and I looked it up on the internet just before I came, of the law of unintended consequences. Apparently there's a sociologist, Thomas Merton, 1936, who popularized this phrase, and where you take a series of, you try to massage to achieve some predetermined outcomes, and those outcomes may or may not happen. But you've landed a sector and a huge country, one of the largest countries into the world, into a first-class crisis.
First-class crisis.
Indeed. I want to take this forward with Dr. Rahul Khullar there, and Sanjeev Aga, who's had his skin in the game, sir, does believe that the sector is running into a speeding train. My direct question to you is, do you subscribe to that view, or do you believe, relatively speaking, the balance sheet are still stable and a lot is being made out of the pain out there?
No, I think Sanjeev has got it broadly right. There is a very serious problem. What I'm a little surprised about is that, the TRAI I worked with had warned about the precarious state of finances as far back as 2013 and in 2014 and 15 before the auction. So it's not as if the government did not know. Secondly, it was clear that spillover problems would mean that the telecom problem would become a banking problem. Third, that the banking problem would be a repeat of the 2008 crisis, which meant the socialization of debt, which would imply that private debt becomes public debt. And all this was known and documented as far back as 2013. So I'm a little surprised why it's taken the government so long to wake up. Second, the TRAI, even at that time, had made suggestions on how to fix the problem, because if you're preempting 40% of the resources, why are you not lowering the license fee and the HSE as the NTP of 2012 had promised? And I think the government has just allowed this problem to linger for 2 years. It has been exacerbated by what has happened over the last 9 months, where it would seem that the regulatory bodies, and I'm including both the government and TRAI, seem to have lost a grip on what is happening, and I've lost focus on what their job is, which is consumer protection on one hand, but definitely the viable financial and economic development of sector as large as this. Let me stop there.
Strong words there coming from Rahul Khullar, saying that over the last 9 months seems like the telecom department and the TRAI have lost a grip of the sector, and it's surprising to see even the finance minister broadly agree with that. His comments allude to the fact that the DOT and the TRAI can't preside over the death of the sector. Rajan, Mathews, let's not sort of be diplomatic in this discussion. We all admit that this is a crisis, so let's not try and be diplomatic. Tell us what has got us here. Is it regulatory, negligence? Is it the entry of this one operator that seems to have changed the dynamics of the sector? Is it the fact that the existing operator has got into a bit of a comfort zone? What is it that got us here? Whom would you blame?
So Sandeep, I think there's plenty of blame to go around to everybody. I think the crisis really started with the cancellation of these licenses, 5 of them, the Supreme Court obviously stepping in, auctions beginning, burgeoning debt coming as a result of these outlandish bids that came out for reserve prices that had lost touch with the market reality, forced, if you will, buying with the limited quantum of spectrum, doubling up of upfront payments along with a continuous revenue share, the continuous plunging of the revenue stream, unbridled competition. So all of these were cumulative, and I think the tipping point obviously came with the new entrants, Reliance, coming in and offering free service. Now, yes, we've had these types of events before in terms of promotions, but this type of extended promotion clearly was not anticipated by the industry, and you can't survive in a world where you give away things for free over extended periods of time. And I think this is what really put it over the edge. The cumulative effect of all of these things over the last 8 or so years has now really caught up with the industry, and now I think we have rightly, as Sanjeev put it, looking at a speeding train coming down the tracks, and everybody seems in a bit paralyzed, and I'm glad that somebody is beginning to take some action. We've been crying hoarse about this, writing letters both to the TRAI, to the DOT. There's a ping pong going on for a while. When the new entrant came in, we raised certain issues. Now it's in the courts, and some of these issues of predatory pricing, dominant share, whether the promo period was inappropriately held, all of these things unfortunately are now in the courts, and we'll have to wait to see what the judicial bodies come up with.
Indeed. Sanjay Kapoor, I'm going to ask you a direct question on what the finance minister told us right here at ET Now. And he said predatory pricing risks being anti-competitive if allowed for too long. And he also said that the regulator has to examine what is happening with freebies in telecom. The question that I need to put forward to you is, do you believe the regulator at some stage gave RelJio too long a rope?
I think we'll be very parochial if we just looked at what's happened lately on the pricing. I'm absolutely clear that the regulator and the ministerial forum will look at how to deal with that and come out with some solutions which will be more systemic and will apply to everybody uniformly. But I think we are missing probably the woods for the trees here. The whole problem actually is a structural issue which has led to the industry being where it is. Very categorically, the world over, this industry survives as an oligopoly. But in India, there was an attempt to convert it to a perfect competition, and that perfect competition led to that term used, hyper-competitiveness in this market, where there were more than 12 players in the market. That's the root cause of how this problem started happening in this country. And because of that lopsided structure, which is unsustainable in any market, we had other things to follow. A clear mismatch on the costs which are there in the industry, especially spectrum. And spectrum in this country was priced at levels which are unheard of in the rest of the world. And through means of artificial scarcity, etc., all auctions that happened in this country prior to the last one, there was an artificial scarcity as well for this commodity, which is absolutely required to make this industry even breathe. and then the pricing structure in the market doesn't support the costs that get really institutionalized for the whole industry in terms of spectrum. So when it's revenues, we are probably the least possible revenue realization in the world. When it comes to cost, we pay the highest cost for spectrum anywhere in the world. And then the policies that support it, primarily the SUC, the AGR definition, the revenue share with the government, when there's a market mechanism to discover the price of the raw material, why do we have to charge high prices which are more than the administrative cost for all this? The IUC that you have, why is it not reflective of the costs that are there for the whole industry to be actually sustainable going forward? Now, these are the problems that have led to the issue. Yes, of course, the new player coming in, putting everybody down to knees, bringing down the prices low, everybody trying to protect their revenues and their customers is a very natural phenomena, and it has led to where it is. But the fact of the matter is that after paying for the spectrum and the costs in this industry, where's the money left with any operator to grow the customer experience, to be globally competitive, and to make sure that there is sustainability of the industry going forward? So I think these are the fundamental issues that have led us to where we are. Let's not put all the blame on the last thing that happened in the market.
All right, fair point, I get that point. But, you know, Rahul Khullar, I want to come to you on what the TRAI is sort of seemingly trying to do, what the government is trying to do now. And we believe it's not enough. You know, they're now looking at curbing these promotional periods, looking at this grace time offered. You know, in my view, it's coming in too late. What is the point of looking at it now? I mean, it's unlikely that a new entrant is now going to come and disrupt the market. The disruption has already happened, and these measures cannot be done with retrospective effect. So do you believe such measures of, you know, now coming up with a policy on what should be a promotion period, you know, how long can these freebies last, is it just futile?
Well, it's not, let's not call it futile, but it is a matter of closing this, locking stables after the horses have bolted. So you're right to that extent that, you know, that is all the government is going to come up with. Then it's actually rather absurd because it does very little. Try and think of the following thing. When TDSAT has been telling TRAI for the last 6 months, look at this problem, wake up, do something. There has been no response, and this is it's a serious problem. I don't think, in my memory at least, TDSAT ever gave such directions to the regulator. And it's exactly this problem, that when people saw that there was a crisis on the horizon, they started raising their voices. And unfortunately, both, as I've said earlier, I think both in the department and the regulatory office, nobody sort of woke up. It was later that when the Telecom Commission and the then Secretary, Mr. Deepak, sent a message to the regulator that, look, there's something seriously wrong over here and government revenue is involved, that is when people started waking up. My own listing is that until the government does something about the license fee, the SUC, nothing is going to happen. So unless they're willing to give up revenue and put some more money in the hands of the telcos, they're not really doing anything. Second, they need to have a very hard look at how you curb a race to the bottom in terms of tariffs. That is a valid problem. I faced that problem in 2012, but fortunately, I never had to intervene because the market self-corrected. And we started clawing back freebies, so the average tariff started rising. But, you know, disruption I understand in any market. But this has gone well beyond disruption. This is actually destroying the economic value of both the industry and the economy. That's all for now.
Indeed, disruption, I think, has become destruction, if I may, quite frankly speaking, Mr. Aga. So, I'm going to put forward the same question to you. Is it a little too late when the government is talking about having checks on predatory pricing, is a 90-day window enough? I mean, they should have walked this talk earlier. And the second part of my question is it also time that the government realizes that they will have to forego of some revenue for the sector to stay viable, whether it's AGR, whether it's spectrum user charges and all of that?
You know, let me be as direct as possible. You know, I could go back even to 2002 and WLL and cancellation of licenses, and I agree with everything that Sanjay and Rajan have said and Dr. Khullar. But to me, there is one central root cause which sticks out to the present crisis. We may have had all kinds of crises in the background, but there is one central root cause. There is a clear-cut black and white regulation which says that a voice tariff cannot go below the rate of interconnect charge. It is crystal clear, it is black and white, it is explicit, it is specific. And it is known, and it is not enforced. And if you have something of this nature, then what do you do? And that is the one reason why we find ourselves, and as Dr. Khullar said, that has the horse bolted? Perhaps, but enforce it now. It's the law. You know, there are certain things you can't debate, they have to be done. That is the first point.
Right.
And the second point I just want to mention, because that's the other big elephant in the room, which has not yet happened. But I just find this uncontrollable and inexplicable urge to fiddle with interconnect rates. And I'm just, with all the persuasion at my command, the country is playing with fire. And this fire will not be restricted to the telecom sector, it will impact the whole economy. And for God's sake, put it off for 2-3 years. This is not something which you know, for these narrow considerations, you don't realize how destructive policy can be if you don't realize that, as I said,
the ramifications
unintended consequences.
And we know the justification they will give. They'll say this is in the interest of the consumer when it will end up damaging the industry. You know, Rajan, Mathews, I want to come to you. The point that Dr. Khullar made as well on looking at, you know, the only way to do this is to bring down the spectrum usage charges or to relook at the license fee that telecom operators pay the government. As you know, you represent the industry body, are actively involved in industry even now. What is it that the industry would prefer? I'm sure you made representation to the government as well. And what's the sense that you're getting? Is the government open to considering this at all? Because this is going to have revenue implications as well.
So as Dr. Khullar rightly pointed out, those recommendations have been on the table from the TRAI for at least 3 to 4 years. So the very low-hanging fruit, as it were, was the reduction of the license fee from its present 8% to say 3% and then sliding down to 0, reduce the SUC charge, which is anywhere from 1 to 5%, bring it down to 1%, start looking at the definition of the adjusted gross revenue on which these percentages are computed. Look at what just happened recently as an indicator. All right, when the spectrum auctions happened in 2013 or 14, the finance ministry said that for the first time anywhere in the globe, they were going to start imposing a service tax. Get this, a service tax on the award of spectrum which you just purchased. So in addition to paying all of this money up front, you are now being asked to pay 15% as service tax. Of course there's offset, but look at this. You had to spread these payments over 3 years. On a net present value, it's a pittance. And now you're going from 15 to 18% on GST. And when we asked the finance ministry what is going to happen, they said, yes, of course. For all of these unpaid amounts on these spectrum auctions, the debt owing to the government, we're going to have to now pay from 15 to 18%. So you can see what is happening, and somebody in the government needs to wake up and say, let's put these low-hanging fruit into action, remove these anomalies, and let's just get on. Coming back to GST, look at this. Railways, 5%. I understand economy class tickets on airfare, 5%. We go from 15% to 18%. So again, the government just needs to focus and say, this industry is in trouble. Let's take away all of these things, put in place the reforms, and I think even these 5 or 6 simple steps, in our opinion, will get the industry certainly back on its feet from its hobbled situation.
Okay, just to be the devil's advocate, that 15 to 18%, the justification being given by Finance Ministry is that you get input credit on that. But I want to just talk about the other point, and Sanjay, I want to pick that up with you. Whether it is the obligation to contribute to that USO fund or even the government's own mandate of keeping a BSNL and MTNL up and running, letting these telecom operators bleed. So the two questions, I mean, should we do away with the USO fund altogether? Has it outlived its relevance? That's point number one. And point number two is, what is the government's own thinking on, having these white elephants like a BSNL and MTNL? Are we seeing another Air India in the making on that?
Yeah, so let me start with answering your second question first. I think if we really have to look at a structural correction, then the government actively has to make sure that this country in telecommunications sees an oligopoly in existence, which is a competition between 3 or 4 players, max 5. And if that means that a white elephant like BSNL, MTNL, who have been absolutely uncompetitive in an operation like what prevails in the market, I think they should shut shop. Otherwise, the fate will be exactly that of Air India. They have no business case going. With the sort of number of employees that they have, the sort of cost structure that they have, they cannot be amongst the top 3-4 players is very, very evident. So I think why wait for those entities to be decimated and create more agony for the industry? The best is save the money of the exchequers and shut down that company and sell it off or privatize it before it's decimated to a value of 0. I think that's absolutely written on the cards. Otherwise, it will have the same fate as Air India, as rightly pointed out by you. The second point to say, what do we do with the USO funds? The fact of the matter is that the USO funds till date have not been put to use where the industry has accreted any value that has either brought down their costs or taken up their consumer experience or given them a bigger reach to the least common denominator in the marketplace. So I think it has never served a purpose, but it has added on to the costs of the industries and to the pain of the industries. So I think when the ministerial group takes into account the whole cost structure that they must, because if government is desirous of the least prices and affordable prices in this country, then the cost structures have to support that requirement of the government. And if that is true, then it has to look at all cost elements, and I think USO stands there, which has been absolutely unproductive. There's a lot of money to be pumped back into the industry, and I think that should be given in the hands of the private operators who've been very successful in providing such a robust infrastructure in the country. I heard Mr. Jaitley say yesterday that, look, what percentage of people actually fly private airlines. So where's the need to have a state-run airline service? Same is the case over here. We've seen that the deployment of networks has been best done by private. And if that is true, then all the USO funds should be given back to the private sector so that they can deploy and use it for the betterment of the consumer and the industry going forward.
Right. I know we probably a section of of the industry may not like us for saying this, but there is a case to consider on why should BSNL or MTNL or these sort of white elephants exist. Dr. Khullar, what is your own view? Today the government is talking of privatizing Air India, and like Sanjay pointed out in the interview to ET Now, the finance minister said if 85% of the passengers fly private carriers, why can't 100%? And what is this concept of having a national carrier that has to be owned by the government? Similarly, can't a similar rule apply for telecom, or will this bogey of telecom being a strategic sector be thrown at by various interests and such a move not happen? What is your own view? Should the government look at a sort of out of the box decision on BSNL and MTNL as well?
Well, let me put it this way. I think they are already looking at the BSNL MTNL problem. The problem is that they've been looking at it for the last 5 years and they're not taking a decision. Neither the UPA nor the new government. And I think the way they are going about it now is basically merging BSNL and hoping that they will improve it. My own position on this matter is privatization and all these are very, very big bankings, and they take their time getting done. The point is you have a crisis on your hand now, you have a fire going. if you don't put that fire out, it doesn't matter whether BSNL survives or not, you will have a serious public sector debt problem. So you simply cannot afford to look away from the big problem, which is how do you salvage the private sector industry, which has invested hugely in the sector, and where that a large part of that investment has been debt financed. How are you going to deleverage? I mean, how are you going to get that debt down? Because if you don't, and even one company goes belly up, you have a first-class NPA problem. So look at that rather than BSNL and other things at this point of time.
Indeed. Let me just talk about the low-hanging fruits that Rajan Mathews spoke about, Mr. Aga. One of them perhaps could be a deferred payment for spectrum, and the other could be why not allow spectrum as a collateral. I mean, the argument that's given against it that it's a leased commodity, but look at the money that's paid out for that leased commodity. So can it be used as a collateral, and will that be at all any kind of a respite for the industry if those two things are allowed?
Supriya, I agree with you and I agree with Rajan. But I think this is not today's problem. Let me separate conceptually what is happening. You can hypothetically have an overtaxed sector, and then that sector will not grow. It will have slow growth, it will have small value, it will have small profits. But a sector where the revenue is 1,80,000 crores and declining, and the losses are 60,000 crores, is not because of high taxation. It is because of rigged and non-level playing field conditions. That is the central problem, and if I may say so, in the UPA government, these things were not nipped in the bud, and they came back to haunt the government. So I agree with everything about, interest charges, but they are just going to extend the agony. It is throwing good money after bad. The central problem which has brought us to our knees and which will bring the country to its knees is a rigged playing field. And unless this is fixed, you will have, we can beat around the bush, but this is really what has happened. I have never come across a sector with so much demand and where people have 60,000 crores of losses, that's it, and it will go up next year.
Rajan Mathews, rigged is what Sanjeev Aga is calling it. He's saying it's just not a level playing field. A word on the debt exposure, because, again, the context of the discussion is also the fact that it comes a week after one of the large telecom operators almost went bankrupt. I know many people in the industry have been skeptical about this operator and its financial health for a while now, but there was a real debt scare on the street that you had a credible sort of large operator, listed entity that was on the verge of going bankrupt, that was on the verge of defaulting, that had apparently defaulted on some loans as well. And the debt exposure is about 4 lakh crores. We had this letter written by the State Bank of India chairperson, Arundhati Bhattacharya, explaining serious concern on the health of, on the financial health of the sector and the debt exposure. What is your own view? Is there a genuine fear that some of these loans could indeed turn into an NPA and telecom could be the next big could be like a steel sector riddled with NPAs? Is that a real threat that we're looking at?
Absolutely. I think that's a very real, not just a threat or a scare, but a reality. And I think this is one of the issues, not necessarily the only issue, but clearly one of the issues. And I think Dr. Khullar put it well, when private debt becomes public debt, I think there's a real problem. And I think we have to really say, look, how do we get the sector back on its feet? One of the things that we keep talking about is going back to the government. And I said, why do we want to go back to the government? A good 30 to 40% of our revenue goes back to the government in some form or fashion. So I think that's why we're going to the government and saying, look, there are certain endemic issues, obviously level playing field issues, obviously tax issues, which cumulatively are dragging this sector to its knees. And so again, we go back to this fundamental issue saying is that, look, please, the debt is a real problem. These debt servicing requirements are now more, if you will, than some companies' EBITDA earnings. So if you look at about 75,000 crore rupees of EBITDA earnings, the debt payout, the repayment as well as interest is close to 150,000 crore rupees, 3 times approximately of the EBITDA earnings. So you can see where the debt problem really sits partly center stage on this, and so the government has to address this issue. And exactly one of the issues we pointed out is a moratorium on the existing debt that is held by the government vis-a-vis spectrum. So extend the moratorium period from 2 to 5 years, and this is what SBI has proposed, and allow payments to be made over the length of the spectrum holding period, which is probably 15, 18 years left. So some of these things clearly can be done. The tax-free debt, for example, an infrastructure-oriented sector such as ours, clearly would benefit from the government allowing the industry to float tax-free debt. So these are things that the government clearly can do right away to help the industry.
Indeed. So there are plenty of low-hanging fruits out there that can be plucked, and the sector can perhaps get some respite. But the problem is endemic. The problem is a rigged playing field, and that needs to be sorted out. On that note, thank you very, very much, Dr. Rahul Khullar, Mr. Sanjeev Aga, Mr. Rajan, Mathews, and Mr. Sanjay Kapoor for being with us on this rather telling discussion. It can go on and on because there's so much more that we can talk about as far as saving Indian telecom is concerned. But thanks very much for being with us.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/ETNow.